I'm the one and only El Job, and welcome back to WASP on Wire 5. It is 5 minutes past the hour, and it's time for our evening news bulletin on homefront conditions as the war progresses. Here's our correspondent, Andrew Jebediah Jesserton on the northern homefront.
Here in the north, where production is booming, the increasing need for weapons and supplies has production expanding rapidly. However, even as companies continue to post record profits, wages are struggling to keep up, rising half as fast as prices. This disparity has caused a fair amount of unrest, especially paired with the doubling of the price of beef and sugar. This discontent has caused many northerners to lose their enthusiasm for the war. Nothing has shown this shift more clearly than enlistment. In the first months of the war, the call for enlistment was answered with so much enthusiasm that some men were turned away. However, in recent days we have seen the opposite problem, with the call for a draft that has been met with rioting. Luckily, the northern economy has fared better overall than the south, mainly due to the proper execution of bond creation. These bonds have helped the northern economy's recovery from bankruptcy in 1862 and will most likely continue to provide an economic boost into the future. Back to you, El Job.
Thank you, Jesserton. And now, an update on the declining situation in the south from our southern correspondent, Clementine Baker.
Here I am in front of one of the smaller southern homes, and unlike in the north, down here, nearly 4 out of 5 men are enlisted in this brutal battle, leaving struggling families alone on the home front to fend for themselves. The Confederacy's poor government and leadership organization has caused many problems, including the economic inflation due to the mass printing of Confederate dollars. In addition, due to obvious problems with the North, the Southerners now have no source of cloth production, for they themselves are unable to harvest raw materials or manufacture them due to the absence of men and factories. The inability of the South to make their own supplies has caused many Southern families to lose their property, livestock, and crops to ill-equipped military forces of the Confederacy. As a result of this, many families have attempted to flee to larger protected cities, and others have stayed on the home front to try to survive the battle that remains on their land. The economic inflation, presence of militias, and tragic Northern Anaconda Plan have all led to a massive shortage of food that has reached a low and plagued almost all the families of the southern home front. As women and children struggle to survive, some have resorted to hoarding their own harvests or rioting in order to stay alive. That concludes the update on the southern home front. Back to you, El Jobe.
Thank you, Clementine. As you can see, especially in the south, as the war progresses, it is continuing to degrade life on the home front. Tonight we have a special presentation on, surprisingly, the role of women in the recent bread riots in Richmond, Virginia.
Thanks, El Jobe. I'm standing in the ruins of the South, and let me tell you, it is not pretty. This is the capital of the Confederacy, but as of this year, 1863, it is not the proud city it once was. With the Union controlling a large portion of Virginia's coast, inland cities are starving, and the unattended fields lay useless while soldiers remain at their posts. The rail system and the James River Canal are being overworked trying to supply the men on the front. What little food that does make it through is sold by merchants for outrageous prices. With the large amount of policemen absent due to the war, crime has increased significantly, and the streets are filled with hungry mothers willing to do anything to get some food for their children, from begging to the streets all the way to prostitution. As the winter continues, this harsh weather has made it increasingly difficult to find food, and it is now a luxury not to starve to death. It has been 3 long months since the bread riots took place. Thousands of outraged women broke into shops and seized food, clothing, and shoes before the militia arrived to restore order. But that is not all the women are up to. Because of Florence Nightingale's work during the Crimean War, many women are becoming nurses to help with injured men on the front line. In fact, Clara Barton recently founded the Red Cross, a humanitarian organization that provides emergency assistance and disaster relief. There's Juliet Hopkins, who converts tobacco factories into hospitals, Susie Taylor, an African-American nurse, Dr. Mary Walker, a surgeon, and Dorothea Dix, who before the war worked to improve the treatment of mentally ill, but has now become such an excellent nurse, she has been appointed the superintendent of female nurses for the Union Army. Several women have also become spies.
Thank you, Jacqueline, but I'm afraid that's all the time we have. We interrupt our normal programming for a special broadcast on an unfolding events in New York City. Here's our correspondent on the scene, Benjamin Dover, who will give us further details about what is happening. Tell us, Ben Dover, what are you seeing right now?
Thank you, El Jobe. The riots began on Monday after draft day. The chief of a fire station, known as Black Joke Engine Company No. 33, was drafted, so the company stormed City Hall, leading the crowd of nearly 500 waiting outside. They destroyed the draft equipment and sent the officials running, but the riots didn't stop there. The mob spread out to pro-war newspapers, and that night destroyed and burned down an all-black orphanage. By now, many people just protesting the draft have left the riots. The men of the fire station have actually began to fight against the mob. It is mostly Irish immigrants now, mad at having to serve in a country's war whom they are hardly a citizen to. They are especially upset that African Americans are not being drafted, and yet they are competing for their jobs. They are also mad that the rich could pay their way out of the draft, calling it a rich man's war, poor man's battle. Today, the mob returned and began attacking the business district of New York, looting and destroying many businesses. Also, attacks on black African Americans began to escalate, including the lynching of at least 2 African American men. The mayor has requested support from federal troops, but has stopped short of declaring martial law. Congress is considering passing an emergency bill offering loans to poor workers to evade the draft, as well as announcing the suspension of the draft. Altogether, anything to appease the mob. Benjamin from New York. Sir, why have you been rioting these past few days?
We didn't come over here from Ireland to fight in somebody else's bloody war. Plus, the Negroes aren't even being drafted, so why do we need to be?
Heavens, those Irishmen are stirring quite the brouhaha. For our viewers who are unaware of recent events leading up to this, the draft was first instituted as the series of enrollment acts in March of 1863 that sought to draft men from ages 20 to 45 for an enlistment of 3 years. The draft was especially resented in the Democratic strongholds opposed to the war, where the draft was perceived as an instrument of the Republican government trying to get rid of their political power. The favorable terms laid out for the rich is also a cause of great indignation, as somebody can avoid the draft by hiring a substitute or paying a $300 commutation fee. Although most of the attention directed towards the draft is up north, the South had the first draft in American history on the 16th of April of last year. This draft, instead of the North's random lottery, is a general draft that is conscripting all men between the ages of 18 and 35. Both drafts do exempt persons who have been deemed necessary. This exception has a large scope of men who are involved in infrastructure, manufacturing, and government. The Southern draft also allows rich men to avoid conscription by paying a mite sum. An inside source in the Confederate Congress has also added that a new bill is soon to be passed into law that exempts anybody with 20 or more slaves from military service. This iniquity has created a great deal of clamor among state governors, especially Zebulon Vance of North Carolina and Joseph Brown of Georgia. These 2 governors both have attempted to challenge what they call an infringement on states' rights, but state Supreme Courts have upheld a decision enforced by Jefferson Davis. These states seem to be circumventing this ruling, however, because they have higher proportion of exemptions than soldiers drafted compared to other states. This conflict characterizes an important one in Confederate philosophy, as it conflicts with the notion of states' rights and nullification against that of the central power of the Confederate States of America. This concludes our evening emission. Once again, I'm L. Job, 4 Fingers, and thank you for tuning in to WASP.